Welcome back to another episode of Spiritual Teachers Podcast. With me today, calling in from India, is Yeshua Daashaha. Welcome on, Yeshua.
Hi, good to meet you.
Yes, it's an honor to have you. Yeshua Daashaha is the author of Sanskrit Soul, the true Sanskrit of the ancient rishis. So we got a really awesome conversation for you today. Our main topics today are the true nature of Sanskrit, true Sanskrit versus secular Sanskrit, the mastery of consciousness, the history of Sanskrit, the true nature of science, and the whole purpose of religion. So we got a really loaded, beautiful list of topics that we're going to dive into for everybody. So yeah, thank you so much for joining on today.
No, it's great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'd love to hear how your awakening journey started, how everything evolved for you.
Well, it's interesting. I was born into a very religious family, so it started at a very young age. And like a lot of kids, I questioned all the stuff that I was being taught. I was born into a Catholic family, but then my father became very interested in the work of a Frank Bookman, who was a Lutheran minister. So I kind of had a blend between Catholic and, Protestant theology. But I was always very passionate about wanting to know the ultimate truths of religion, and that's ultimately what brought me into yoga and brought me to write this book on Sanskrit. It's my whole life basically.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that happens in the book is that I'm constantly referencing back to Christianity and the Vedas and Buddhism because the passion of my life was always that truth is universal. It has to be. We've had 400 years of science. We all know that gravity affects all of us equally on this planet. I mean, just because I live in Canada, you're in the US, somebody might be in Morocco, another person might be in India. Gravity is the same for all of us. Gravity, in fact, affects the motion of distant galaxies. I mean, this is one of the central tenets of astronomy. And so, at any rate, as a civilization, we've matured a lot in the last 400 years. And so that has always been the passion of my life, has been trying to understand the universality of truth. So the people who had the most powerful impact on my life were, of course, Yeshua of Nazareth. I don't like to call him Jesus because that wasn't his name. That was a Greek bastardization of his name. It happened because there's no sound in Greek for Yah. So, he ended up being called Jesus, and then we call him Jesus. But, it would be like, me calling you Peter Bob or something weird, It's like it's disrespectful. And the name Yeshua itself is incredibly profound, incredibly beautiful. And so to me, it's important to, recognize the name that he was given at birth. And so, at any rate, Christianity had a tremendous influence on the way I think, and I have a great love for what Yeshua tried to give the world. And in fact, that's what drove me. Is that, what I see is that he has probably been the most misunderstood prophet in the history of this planet, and it's an unbelievable tragedy. So what happened is that in writing Sanskrit Soul, I constantly make reference to passages in the New Testament, the Old Testament as well, the Dhammapada, because the Buddha was an incredibly beautiful being. And the whole thrust is to show that truth is indeed universal. One of the thoughts that, so often pops into my mind is that one of the things that modern science has not recognized yet is its greatest contribution. And we all know that modern science has completely transformed life on Earth in the last 400 years, but I don't think we've recognized its greatest contribution to the human race. And what it is, very simply, is that it has actually united us. a scientist, in Silicon Valley can publish a particular scientific paper, perhaps on circuits or whatever, and that can be read by a Muslim in Morocco. And the person in Silicon Valley might be a Protestant, he might be an agnostic. It doesn't really matter, but the person in Morocco is a devout Muslim, and then and he can learn from this dude in Silicon Valley, and then somebody from India who is perhaps Hindu. He picks it up and he can learn from it too. And the same goes for everybody. Somebody in Thailand who's Buddhist, and so on and so forth. So, the reality is that we've come to see that for truth to exist, it has to be proven. And this is why science has taken over our understanding of the world, because we recognize that believing blindly has little to no value. And this is why traditionally religion has been stuck in the mud for so long, because it's all about different religions arguing with each other as to who has the best belief system. And there's no proof. There's no proof. It's like, no, if you're going to be part of this religion, you have to believe this. So I always felt that there was something wrong with that whole perspective. And what drove me was really wanting to know the truth. And that's so, fundamentally where I ended up was when I was about 20 years old, I was really drawn to the work of Carl Jung, because Carl Jung, I don't know if you know this, probably many of and your listeners have come across this, but Carl Jung was basically being primed as the protege of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud wanted Carl Jung to take over his work, but Carl Jung had a completely different orientation, and he recognized that there were deep truths in religion, and he also recognized the universality of religion. So when I was about 20, I ended up reading Man and His Symbols, and I was completely captivated by it. And I was completely captivated by his use of the word archetype. And in fact, the word archetype is front and center in my own book, because the whole structure of Sanskrit is archetypal in nature. So Carl Jung had a profound influence on me. And then there was a great mythologist. There's actually YouTube videos of him, a wonderful, wonderful human being by the name of Joseph Campbell, who also had a big influence on me. And he basically took the work of Carl Jung and took it to another level, because he really started to investigate the nature of mythology. And one of the favorite quotes that I've heard of, that I came across with Joseph Campbell, he was asked the question of, what is mythology? And, tongue in cheek, he says, mythology is what we call somebody else's religion. That it's
Yeah,
all myth, that the New Testament is myth, the Old Testament is myth, it's all basically myth. And this is something that is not understood in our modern world, because basically what happened with Carl Jung and what happened with Joseph Campbell is they reframed the whole idea of mythology. So it's very important that I underline this particular point right now, because the way Carl Jung uses the word mythology is it's our worldview. It's the way we think. There's no human being on the planet that doesn't have a fundamental set of assumptions by which they approach their life, by which they analyze their experience, their reality.
yeah,
And so, in a sense, we all have our own personal mythology. It's often, conditioned by, of course, our childhood and what we were taught as kids, and so on and so forth. If I had been born in Jerusalem, or I had been born in Bengaluru, I would have ended up with a completely different worldview.
yeah,
And but I was born in Montreal to a father and mother who really loved their Catholic faith, and that formed the basis of my own worldview. So at any rate, the reason why I came to love Joseph Campbell is that he investigated all the myths of the world. He became the preeminent mythologist during his time. And actually, there's a very interesting anecdote. I came across this in Wikipedia. where Joseph Campbell had a profound influence on George Lucas. And George Lucas apparently was quoted as saying that if he had not met Joseph Campbell, he'd still be writing the script for Star Wars.
Wow. Wow. That I didn't know that. I didn't know
So
that.
no, it's profound, and it was like, what happened was George Lucas. I mean, I shouldn't be putting words in his mouth, but my perception very simply is that he could see that archetypes are the most powerful forces in the human psyche. This is what Carl Jung pointed out, and and it's also what Joseph Campbell pointed out, that these archetypes are very powerful. So the one that Joseph Campbell talks a lot about, and he wrote a whole book about it. It's a very lengthy scholarly work. I read maybe two-thirds of it, and then I couldn't take it anymore. It was too much. But, fundamentally, it's a hero with a thousand faces. And the idea is that the same archetypes show up in every religion. And who is the hero? The hero is you. The hero is me. We're all the hero in our own journey.
Mhm.
And so a symbol like Yeshua of Nazareth in the New Testament, he's a hero figure, and he basically embodies the deep truths of our true eternal nature. And our true eternal nature is here on this planet to overcome the illusion of matter and to conquer death. So at any rate, this is why I fell in love with Joseph Campbell, because I recognized that he could see the truth from a universal perspective, and that really formed the basis of my own worldview. And then what happened was, when I was 24 years old, I ended up coming across Autobiography of a Yogi, and
Yeah,
that
one of my
book
favorite
just blew
books.
me away. I mean, I read it in 3 days.
Yeah, it's such a good book. Uh,
It's an incredible
Excuse me.
book. And what yoga, this is what a lot of people don't know. I mean, it sounds perhaps to a lot of people, it sounds a little bit, weird or, otherworldly, but it's so human. I mean, it's basically, a biography of all these cool saints that he met in India when he was a kid. And, he writes it in this very, very familial language. I mean, it's one of the easiest books to read in your life.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of my book. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say my book is heavy reading, but but in any event, that book completely changed my life. And as fate would have it, 3 months later, I was at a spiritual conference. You know how they have these get-togethers where everybody has a little booth and you kind of walk through the whole pavilion, and it so happened that there were a group of devotees, Yogananda devotees, that had a community in California. And I bumped into them, and I was just absolutely taken with this community in California. So that's what happened, is that it was such a deep soul call that I ended up going and living in this community for 10 years and practicing yoga day and night. And, that really formed, that was a very powerful time in my life. And I'll never forget that experience.
And that was
So at
in
any
California.
rate,
You lived with the Yogananda
go ahead, sorry.
devotees? That was in
Pardon me?
California. You lived with the Yogananda devotees?
Yeah, it's a community in Northern California called Ananda. And so, I had a lot of great friends. I ended up there in 1977. And so I was actively involved from 77 to 1987. And then what happened was I got married. And
Mm.
oh my God, I mean, that's when, the universe decided to really kick me in the ass. And it's the most, it was painful. It was absolutely brutal. I mean, my first marriage was just, it basically chopped my head off, and I didn't know what was up and what was down. But because I had been so interested in philosophy since a young age, I came to a very, very different conclusion as a human being. I, my wife at the time, she had had a very traumatic childhood, and I was deeply in love with her. I was deeply in love with the idea of being a father. I mean, I just felt like that was my path in life. And so when all this drama started to show up in our relationship, I ended up asking a very different question, which it was, hey, we're all human beings. We've all got issues. How do you heal this stuff?
Hmm.
And so that became the central quest of my life. For the next 10, 15 years, I had to answer that question. And to be honest with you, I was angry. I was angry that that the yoga didn't even answer that question. It's like I had to turn to psychology. I had to, investigate all these other modalities in order to try to get an answer to that particular question. Because fundamentally, what I was being told was that, well, the reason why you got problems is because you don't meditate enough. Wrong. It's not the way life is. And so, at any rate, those 10 years or 11 years were some of the most painful years of my life. But when I look back in retrospect, what happened was they drove me to understand one of the most important questions of our existence, which is how to heal our own psyche and how to help somebody else heal their psyche.
Yeah, it's huge.
And in
That's a huge
fact, I've
point.
come to a conclusion that's part of what, go ahead, sorry.
I was just saying that's huge. That's so important for humanity. Like very, like extremely
Oh,
important.
it's so huge. And in fact, I've come to the conclusion that in this new age that we've entered into, from a Vedic perspective, we're no longer in what people call Kali Yuga. We've actually entered into a whole new phase of our existence on this planet called Dwapara Yuga. And so basically, I won't go into too much detail on this, but the whole idea of Kali Yuga is that we go through a period of roughly 2,400 years that is incredibly dark. Man is unable to understand anything beyond matter. His consciousness is very, very dark. And we just emerged from that period fully in the year, according to Sri Yukteswar, in the year 1899. And, what did we see in 1902? We saw the Wright brothers, invent discover the principles of aerodynamics and propulsion. And now we're able to fly all over the world. I mean, the scientific explosion that's happened since the 1900s has been, extraordinary. So, at any rate, there's a very different energy happening on the planet right now. And I've come to the conclusion that the highest spiritual path is actually marriage. Why?
Yeah,
Because it brings up your shit.
yeah. A lot of the masters, that's what they say is relationship is the highest form of yoga.
It's incredible, It's like we fundamentally are here to purify our own psyche. And this was the lesson that was missing for me, because what I had been taught was that you have to, in order to purify your psyche, you have to meditate. But when I really got into studying Sanskrit and then, studying the Yoga Sutras, what I realized is that in many respects, we've got the cart before the horse. You can't really meditate until you've learned how to purify your psyche. So it was like, I spent 10 years in a yoga community, meditating day and night and blah, blah, blah. And, and then life said, okay, now the real yoga begins.
Right, right. Absolutely. Oh man.
So at any rate, that question just drove me. And where it ultimately drove me, so, I ended up exploring many different modalities, and I won't go into all of them. I don't want to, bore you with all the details, but fundamentally, where it brought me was to the work of Lester Levinson. And Lester Levinson, I'm convinced, in reading his biography and participating in a lot of workshops. I mean, I became very involved with one of Lester's organizations, and I never met him, unfortunately, but at any rate, I fell in love with him, and I'm convinced he achieved enlightenment. He achieved the same state that the Buddha achieved. He achieved the same state as all the great saints that Yogananda talks about in autobiography. And his story is an amazing story. I don't know. Do you know his story?
No.
Well, let me tell you in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, because it's an amazing story. And it's a story that speaks about, the beauty of consciousness, but it's also a very American story,
Mhm.
and that's partly what I love about it, So I don't know where he was born. He's somewhere in the Northeast, I should research that, but he basically was a very bright kid. He ended up going to Rutgers University. I think that's in New Jersey.
That's where I
Graduated
went.
magna cum laude.
That's
Pardon
where I
me?
went.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So, at any rate, he graduated magna cum laude in physics, ended up going to work for Honeywell, and he was living the life and, doing really well, living in the center of Manhattan, I believe, at the time. And what happened when he was 42 years old, I believe this was in 1952, I think I've got my dates right. He ends up having this massive heart attack. He goes into the hospital, obviously. And when he comes to, the doctors tell him, look, we've got bad news. You've only got 6 months left to live.
Wow.
And there's nothing we can do for you. So you better go home and just, pack your bags, get ready to leave. Maybe you've got 1 month, maybe you've got six, but six at the max.
Yeah.
So he ends up going home and, he's scared to death of dying. I mean, he had been, he was living, a great life. And so all of a sudden to find out that, it's all going to disappear in a heartbeat, that's a bad pun, but
Right.
but at any rate, he was really scared and he ends up going through this mental process where he says to himself, you know, this is ridiculous. I'm going to die. I'm terrified. I mean, every waking moment, I'm absolutely terrified. I may as well go to the medicine cabinet. I got enough pills in there. I can basically, kill myself in 5 minutes and be done and over with all this fear. I mean, why am I prolonging my agony? And he thought about it and he said, well, and this is the conversation that I remember from reading his biography. So at any rate, he ended up, reasoning. He said, well, Lester, you're still breathing. There's still hope.
Hmm.
And so what happened was he ended up going into his, I don't know, his living room, whatever. He had a whole library. He was a very avid reader. And he pulled all the books off the bookshelf, started reading them feverishly, trying to find an answer. And after 3 days, he said, you know what? I read all those books. It didn't give me the answer. And so he started a process of self-inquiry.
Hmm.
And his process is absolutely brilliant. And he said, well, what do I want in life? And he thought about it and you know, he came to the conclusion, well, I want to be happy. That's what everybody wants.
Hmm.
So then he asked himself a second question, which was, well, when have I been happiest in my life? And he thought back to a high school sweetheart that he had had, in high school. And that's when he was happiest. So he came to the conclusion that happiness is the result of being loved. But as he pondered that question, he realized, you know what, it's not true. I'm dating two women who will marry me at the drop of a hat. I've got a wonderful job. I'm happy. I have incredible family and friends. It's like I'm very much loved, and I'm still not happy. And so he realized the secret to happiness wasn't being loved, it was loving. It was the process of giving love, of expressing love. So then he ended up with a mental leap that was just absolutely brilliant. And he said to himself, okay, well, if the secret to happiness is loving, I wonder if I can change every thought in my psyche from whatever it is, fear, angst, frustration, whatever, to, being loving. So he did a whole inventory of his life. And he started to, look at each experience. He would ask himself, well, do you want to hold on to that or do you want to let it go? So he realized, well, it's not, it's all it's doing is creating more anxiety. I'm going to let it go.
Hmm.
And the more he let go, the happier and happier and happier he became. So that was his process. And then, so what happened was he did this for 3 months. He had to go in for a medical checkup. He goes in for a medical checkup. Actually, he did this for 2 months. He had a medical checkup in 2 months. And so he goes in for a medical checkup. They look at him. They say, "Oh my God, you're perfectly cured. We've never seen anything like this. This is unbelievable." He completely cured his body.
Wow.
So, and he's like, he's just experiencing an incredible bliss. So he continues with this practice. This is his spiritual practice. And then what happens is that, as I recall the story, a month later, he realizing, wow, letting go is so powerful. I think I'm going to let go of bliss itself. And in letting go of bliss, he went into the state that yogis referred to as samadhi, which is universal consciousness. And he didn't know what had happened to him. I mean, he wasn't prepared for it psychologically, but he completely, what happens with samadhi is body consciousness or ego consciousness dissolves, and you experience yourself, not as a physical body, you experience yourself as universal consciousness, you experience yourself as a universe. So at any rate, so that's what happened to him. I mean, he had the experience of enlightenment. And so, he's just living this simple life and I don't remember what happened after that, but he ended up, he decided, well, I'm not going to stay here in Manhattan. I'm going to travel out to California. And as he was driving through Arizona, he was very attracted to, Sedona. I guess it was a sign on the highway. So he drove up to Sedona, and that's where he ended up. And so the result is that he ended up popularizing something called the Sedona method, and the Sedona method is all about letting go. Now let me connect the dot because this is a very important dot to connect because so I'm going to quote something from the New Testament that I would say is one of the most profound statements that Yeshua ever uttered in the New Testament. It comes from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. What does purity of heart mean? Well, it's purity of feeling. And this is what Lester realized. One of the things that Lester taught was that he said to his students, he said, if you really look at your own psyche, you'll notice that, okay, your thought is creating your reality, but what is creating your thought? What's behind thought? Well, it's actually emotion. If you really get conscious, you'll notice that it is emotion that is driving your thought. If you're in a really loving space, you think very different thoughts. And if you're in an angry space, or you're in a fearful space, or you're in an apathetic space. So feeling actually determines our consciousness. And that's what Yeshua was saying. So that was one of the most powerful dot connections I ever experienced in my life. It was like, oh my God, it's feeling that controls how we think. If we can purify the way we feel, then all of a sudden we purify our psyche. This
Yep.
is one of the greatest revelations ever. And in my book, I basically refer to Lester Levinson as a secular saint, which I joke about it a little bit because I mean, it's an oxymoron, right? I mean, who the hell ever heard of a secular saint? And it's like opposites. So at any rate, to me, he achieved what all the great Catholic saints achieved, all the great Vedic saints have achieved, all the great Buddhist saints have achieved, the Bodhisattvas, and so on and so forth, because sainthood or enlightenment is a universal phenomenon.
Yep.
And so that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with Lester's work. And that was actually the ultimate answer to the struggle that I had had in my first marriage. I realized that, that one of the most important things that we need individually and collectively is to know how to purify our own psyche.
Yeah.
And what I ultimately discovered is that until you have the tools to purify your own psyche, you can't really meditate. You try to meditate, and if there's a little bit of upset or you've got some issue going on, your mind is obviously going to gravitate. I got to solve this problem. Oh, this guy that cheated me at work, whatever. I'm going to get back at him, whatever. I mean, these thoughts are mostly unconscious. It's like, oh, well, that's unspiritual. I can't have that thought. I better stuff it away somewhere so nobody sees it, right? Because we're all into pretending we're spiritual. It's like the mind is just, I mean, in India, people call it monkey mind because, well, spiritual. I got to be spiritual. I've got to meditate, and it's like it just becomes this crazy mind, and we don't get out of it. So to learn how to purify the psyche is the secret to being able to meditate deeply. And that was, one of the most extraordinary discoveries of my life. So
That's huge.
so, that's what happened there. And then ultimately, so I basically, because I was angry that yoga didn't give me the answers, it's like, so I end up going to California when I was 24. I was associated with this community for roughly 10 years. So now I'm 34. I get married. And I met Lester's work in 1998. So now I'm what, 45. And so, at any rate, what happened was I had basically walked away from yoga philosophy. I was really upset. I was really upset. And in my book, what I end up saying is that I realized that I thought I was practicing yoga. I mean, really, if you go and you spend 10 years living in a yoga community and you're practicing meditation 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours at night, it's like, I mean, that's kind of what it's about, right? And what I say in my book is that actually what I was doing is I was practicing yoga dogma.
Mm.
And I don't know, there's a very famous speech by Steve Jobs. I link it on my website. You may have seen it. It's an incredible speech. It was a speech that he gave to the graduating class at Stanford, I think in 2005.
I think I've heard it.
Beautiful speech.
Hmm.
You've heard it. I mean, I've gone back and I've watched it a couple of times because I reference his speech in my book because one of his counsel to to the graduating class was don't get trapped in dogma. And that has probably been the fundamental reason why Silicon Valley, became such a dominant force on the planet. And if you think about that, there's another way of saying don't get trapped in dogma is a philosophy that emerged out of Silicon Valley. I think it actually came from Intel, if my research is correct. It's basically become known as the fail fast idea. What they realize at Intel is that when you're designing chips, you don't know what the hell you're doing. You don't know if this design is going to work or that design is going to work or whatever design is going to work. So if you fail fast, you learn fast.
Hmm.
And that became the mantra of Silicon Valley. It's like, you got to fail fast to learn fast so you can develop a chip so that you can compete effectively in the marketplace. And so that became, the lifeblood of Silicon Valley. So here's the amazing thing from a spiritual perspective. Imagine failing fast and learning fast in terms of your own spiritual journey.
Yep.
Imagine what that can produce. And that became the passion of my life. That's why I ended up, writing Sanskrit Soul, because it's like we're all human beings. We've all got issues in our life, which from a Vedic standpoint is referred to as karma. And actually the correct pronunciation is karman with an N attached to it. But in any event, which maybe in a future video we can get into, the meaning of each letter. But the point is that we all have issues. We all come into these bodies. We all have relationships with our parents and friends and business colleagues and so on and so forth. And life's not easy. And so, and a lot of times we don't fail fast. We fail again and again and again. We're tripping over the same bloody shoelaces that we had since we were 6 years old.
Right. Right.
And so we end up having this very painful existence because we don't know how to learn our lessons. And so to me, that whole issue of how to learn your lessons in life is what sets the stage for success in life, success in meditation, success in everything. And that's the fundamental reason why we incarnate. We come here to basically, purify our psyche. So that's what I saw with Lester's work. So just to finish the story, I didn't think I'd go off on such a long tangent, but anyway, let me
Perfect.
finish the story.
Yeah.
Let me finish the story. So what happened was I was in Mexico for a number of years. I was involved with my brother and my father on a very large real estate development project, and then in 2008 that collapsed because of the Lehman crash, and that was one of the most painful and brutal experiences of my life. And in fact, my best friend and business partner ends up dying 6 months later in a car crash. I mean, it was brutal.
Oh God.
And life can be brutal, and I'm not the only one. I mean, many people have had really brutal experiences in their life, and I frankly, I went into a depression for 3 years. I didn't quite know, what to do with myself. So at any rate, what happened was I decided I wanted to get back into yoga. So like this is like, well, Lehman is what, 2008, 2009, right? So now I'm what, in my mid 50s. And I decided that I want to really get back into yoga. And I always had known that the Yoga Sutras were the very foundation of yoga philosophy, the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras.
Yeah.
And what I had learned when I was living in this community was that you can't translate Sanskrit. It's impossible to translate. And so I did the next best thing because I had never studied Sanskrit. I pulled out a Sanskrit English dictionary and I looked up every single Sanskrit word in the dictionary. And I was blown away when I started studying the dictionary for each word. It's like I started having all these insights, all these revelations, and it just blew me away. So, I had my laptop and I started jotting down notes because it was like, what I was learning from the Yoga Sutras was blowing me away. And so as I'm jotting down all of these notes, I realized, I don't know, 3 or 6 months into it, oh my God, I'm writing a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did. I wrote a book, Commentaries on the Yoga Sutras. And so this is happening between the years. I got into this like roughly around 2013 when I started doing that. 2013, 2015 was when I wrote this. And what happened was I didn't feel good about publishing it. Why? It's like, who the hell writes a book about the Yoga Sutras who doesn't know Sanskrit? I mean, talk about flaky. It's like obviously you have to be a Sanskrit scholar to, write about something like that. So that's what took me to India. I realized that if I wanted to publish this book, I had to meet a Sanskrit and Vedic scholar who could, put me on the straight and narrow, right? And so that's what happened. So I ended up in India in 2017. I ended up meeting a beautiful soul by the name of Swami Shanti Dharmananda Saraswati. And he was so gracious. He said, "Yeah," he said, I'll read every single page of your book and I'll help you publish it."
Amazing.
And oh man, it was like music to my ears. He was so sweet. And so, what I started doing was I just started printing up, a chapter at a time, and I'd give it to him and I'd let him read it and, make notes and, flag this and flag that. You can't say this, you got to change this, blah, blah, blah. And so we do this for a couple of months, and then a couple of months into the project, he ends up saying to me, he says to me, "Listen, if if you want to do this right, you have to learn the Sanskrit." And it was like, oh my God. I was like, by that time, I'm 64 years old. It's like, that's the last thing that I was wanting to hear. And
Yeah.
so I ended up joking with him. I said, "Swamiji," I said, "I don't know if you've looked in the mirror lately, but you and I aren't getting any younger. It's going to take me 10 years to learn Sanskrit."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he said, "No, it's not." He said, "You'll have a good understanding of Sanskrit in a year and a half." And but I was really petulant. It's like I was like this, I was having a bit of a temper tantrum. I mean, it lasted probably about a month. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to learn Sanskrit, because it was like, oh my God, this is, I came here to publish my book, damn it.
Right. 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 Right.
And so, at any rate, it was like another detour in my life. But he was right. I recognized he was right. And so I started getting into it. And as I started getting into it, I absolutely fell in love with Sanskrit. It was the most beautiful, the most profound thing that I had ever encountered. And now, as I look back, it's one of the greatest blessings of my life. I mean, Sanskrit is unbelievable. I mean, we have no idea in the West of the beauty and depth of Sanskrit. So that actually brings us into the topic of secular Sanskrit versus the true Sanskrit, because
Yes.
what happened was Swamiji wasn't teaching me, what is the quote unquote normal Sanskrit that everybody learns at university and in high school. He was teaching me an ancient Sanskrit that had been passed down from guru to disciple for thousands of years. And
Wow.
I couldn't believe him. I had to ask him the same question 7 or 8 times because I mean, I would hear his answer and I would hear it, and I was so blown away that I was being taught this ancient knowledge that nobody seemed to know. And I asked him, I mean, many times I said, "Swamiji, this doesn't make any bloody sense to me," because he said to me, he said, He said less than 1% of people in India actually know this Sanskrit. And
Wow.
I said, that doesn't make any sense, to me. And I asked him why. I mean, I asked him the question in so many different ways. And he said, well, fundamentally, so this is where you have to understand a little bit of the history of Sanskrit, is that so Sanskrit is an ancient language. Let me start with that because there's a lot of controversy about it. Linguists say, okay, in terms of, written Sanskrit, it goes back to, I think, around 1200 BC. But in terms of Indian scripture and Indian legend, they basically say that Sanskrit is an eternal language. And it actually came from a period of Earth's history called Satya Yuga, which, according to Sri Yukteswar, the peak occurred around 13,000 years ago.
Mhm.
So just to summarize, I keep referring to the yugas. I mean, we really need to do a whole video on this whole thing, but let me just say very simply that one of the things that Sri Yukteswar talked about in his book, The Holy Science, which was published in 1894. I mean, he said a lot of amazing things. But one of the things that he said is that the precession of the equinoxes, we've known about, the Greeks have known about it. I mean, it's a central aspect of astronomy. And in fact, Newton, produced a theory as to why the precession of the equinoxes happen. And so in terms of conventional astronomy, it's roughly a 25,000 year cycle. And Newton's theory was that it's what's caused. So what is precession? Let me just basically explain what precession of the equinoxes is that it takes the point of spring. So if you look at the sun in relationship to the earth and you project it against the zodiac, you'll notice that that particular point is actually going backwards in the zodiac. And that precession takes, and this is a point of controversy, it takes, according to Sri Yukteswar, it takes 24,000 years. According to modern science, it takes 25,000, whatever they've calculated it. But now there's some controversy that's coming up around the whole thing because the fundamental presumption of the Newtonian theory is that it's a circular orbit. Well, we know from Kepler and others that there are very, very few circular orbits in the universe. Most orbits, the planets are all elliptical.
Yeah.
So at any rate, the truth of the matter is that we really haven't been able to calculate its exact timing, okay? And that's something that science will, with time, discover over time. So let me just explain, because what Sri Yukteswar explains in his book in 1894 is that what is causing precession is not what Newton theorized, which was, the axis of the Earth tilting with, like a top, like if you have a spinning top. What he says is causing it is that the Earth has a twin star.
Mm.
And interestingly enough, if you study a little bit about astronomy, this is called, you can look it up in Wikipedia, there's a great article on it, multiple star systems. And basically, astronomers theorize that 70% of the stars in the Milky Way are part of a multiple star system.
Mhm.
If you look up at the constellation Taurus, one of the brightest lights in Taurus is a star that's called Capella, but it's not one star. It's seven stars. But to our naked eye, it looks like one star. But now, with advanced microscope, not microscopes, telescopes, we can see, we've been able to see that it's actually seven stars. So at any rate, our understanding of astronomy is just beginning. I mean, we're just beginning to discover this universe that we live in. So, at any rate, the fundamental idea that was actually recorded in Manusmriti, which is one of the ancient texts of India. So it's not like Sri Yukteswar invented this. This was written by Manu, and Manu is considered to be one of the ancient rishis. So fundamentally, the idea is that you have two stars and they're rotating against each other. And you can look it up. I mean, they rotate like this. They're gravitationally bound. And so what happens is that the Earth, in rotating around its dual, it's traveling throughout the galaxy. And that's what's causing the experience of precession. So at any rate, in the same sense that we all know that the Earth has one moon, Jupiter, Galileo was the first to discover it had four moons. I looked it up recently. Do you know how many moons Jupiter has now?
I think it's seven, right?
95.
Whoa. Okay. Wow.
And part of it comes down to how you define a moon. I mean, that's how technical it's becoming. But Jupiter, of course, is the biggest planet in our solar system, but it has all these moons. But here's the point that I'm leading to is that in the same way that Jupiter is traveling around the sun, it's carrying all its moons with it. Same thing with Earth, same thing with each planet. Well, what happens is that our sun has its all of its planets with all of its moon and with the asteroid belt and so on. So it's carrying all of that around in its relationship to its dual star. And so that's what's creating precession. Now, here is the really mind-boggling thing that Manu Smriti, which is an ancient text from India, what Manu revealed and what Sri Yukteswar ended up confirming is that as we travel throughout our galaxy, the Milky Way, we move closer and closer to the galactic center, and then we move farther and farther away to the galactic center. And what Sri Yukteswar says is that as we move closer to the galactic center, there's a tremendous emanation of light coming from the galactic center. So as we move closer to the galactic center, there is a whole awakening of consciousness that happens on planet
Makes
Earth.
sense. Yeah,
And
makes
we
total
have
sense.
sorry?
Makes total sense.
So that's what's happened is that we went through a very, very dark period because we were the farthest away from the galactic center in this 24,000 year cycle. And that's what Kali Yuga is. And so now we've moved into a new phase, which, the ancient rishis called Dwapara Yuga. And this is the electrical age. Okay, that's basically how it's described. We are going to describe and basically, you see it in Einstein's famous formula, E is equal to mc squared. And you can flip those. Like any mathematical equation, you can flip those symbols around. So E is energy, and m is mass, which is basically matter, and c is the speed of light. So, you can solve that equation for matter. Matter would be what? The speed of light squared divided by energy, whatever. So the point is, very simply, is that matter is an expression of energy. And this is what we're learning.
Mhm.
And so, at any rate, this is what we are going to master in the next 2,400 years. Well, we're already into it about 100 years. So, we've got another, 2,300 roughly to go. So, we are going to completely master matter. And what the ancient rishis point out is that we will be able to travel to the farthest reaches of the universe because we will understand that all matter is essentially energy, and we're going to completely master it. So this is what the Vedas talk about. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Mhm.
So, then we enter a new yuga, and I won't, I've gone a little bit too far down this road, but then we enter into a whole different phase. And, that phase is basically referred to as the age of the demigods. And what's so fascinating is that there's so much knowledge coming out about Sumeria and the Anunnaki. Well,
Yeah.
those were gods. They're referred to as gods. But interestingly enough, there's a phase of human history where we have these very powerful beings. You have it with the Greeks, Zeus and Aphrodite and Apollo and all those dudes. And then you have it with, you also have, there's in the Druid tradition, you have this whole thing about wizards and witches and so
Hmm.
on and so forth with all these magical powers. So this is actually lore that's coming from the last descending Tritya Yuga that we came from.
Yeah.
But the Vedas basically don't call these people gods. They basically say they're demigods. And the reason why they're demigods is they're still on an ego trip, you know?
Right. Right.
They amass this huge amount of power, but they don't understand the deepest secrets of the universe. And so what happens is then we enter into the age of light, the age of enlightenment, which is referred to as Satya Yuga, and that's referred to as the age of the gods. And that's when enlightened beings choose to incarnate on this planet. And that's where the Sanskrit language actually comes from. That, according to legend, that's where it comes from. It comes from a period of time on Earth where man was enlightened.
Mm.
So this is a completely different worldview. I mean, the standard model in geology and the standard model in history and in anthropology and so on and so forth is that we all evolved from apes. But that whole theory is now really starting to fall apart, especially with AI. I don't know. Have you seen any of these videos on Sumer?
Yeah. Yeah, it's good.
Oh, they're
That
amazing.
stuff's crazy. But I just have a question for you. So when you were speaking with your teacher, the Sanskrit teacher, and he was telling you about the 1% of India, not only 1% of India knowing this ancient Sanskrit, why did he say that? Like, why was it that so few?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing me back to the central thread of the conversation. So fundamentally, what happened was India went through a period of 800 years. It depends on where you measure it from, but basically, there was a Muslim invasion that happened in 1186, I think, is the exact date. So India was a conquered land for like 800 years. So the Muslims had conquered it, and then basically the Mongols ended up conquering it. It wasn't Genghis Khan, but it was, I think, his son or his grandson, somebody by the name of Timurend. And actually, instead of it being called the Mughal Empire, it should have been called the Timurid Empire. If you read some scholarly work on it, it was really Timurend that set the tone for that whole phase that is referred to as the Mughal phase. And it was those groups of beings that ended up creating the Taj Mahal and all that incredible architecture. But at any rate, and then the British came, and they came with the British East India Company. And they didn't go there to actually conquer India. I don't think that was their original intention. They just went there to do business. I mean, import spices and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But gradually as they spread their wings, they gained more and more control. They did business deals with different Maharajas, and they were astute business people. So they ended up gaining control over India. And there's a lot of animosity in India towards the British because of how the British treated Indians, and I can understand that. But from a Sanskrit point of view, our evolution as beings on this planet is all perfect, and that's something that I'd love to talk about. But let's not go down that path at this particular point in time. Every single thing that's happening on this planet is actually perfect because we're all here to evolve. So at any rate, so what happened was the British basically ended up asking themselves, well, how are we going to how are we going to help these people modernize? And they decided that we have to change their educational system.
Mm.
So they basically impose their English educational system on India. And it's called the Macaulay something or other. I looked it up the other day. I don't have it in front of me, but in any event, you can look it up or you can, ask ChatGPT. It happened in 1835. They decided that, okay, we want to create a bunch of Indians that think like young Brits. And so, if anybody who's gone to India, if you see British school children, not British, if you a Freudian slip, if you see Indian school children, the little boys are wearing their nice little ties and their shorts. I mean, they look like British school kids.
Mhm.
So at any rate, here's what happened is that they ended up completely changing the way Sanskrit is taught. And Sanskrit had been taught traditionally, and that the traditional teaching model in India was called the Gurukula method, which is a guru, you would send your children to a particular teacher and he would, at a young age, and he would basically discipline them and teach them, all the basics, but they would also get a spiritual education. They would also, learn Sanskrit.
Mhm.
And so they basically got rid of all that and started teaching, the same kind of thing that we're taught. taught, science and grammar and all that kind of stuff. So what happened was they unwittingly destroyed Sanskrit.
Okay,
They
so
created,
so so that was what you call secular Sanskrit, right? Just
I
to
call it secular Sanskrit. I don't want to badmouth the British. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, if the British didn't end up in India, you and I wouldn't even know the word yoga.
Mhm.
I mean, it's because the British ended up in India that, I mean, India is making millions of dollars every year with tourists like you and I that are going there to, learn yoga and visit temples and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
So at any rate, we've evolved the way that we've evolved as a planet. All of us have, animosity, whether it's personal or cultural with respect to whatever our personal or, cultural history is. But the point is very simply is that I call it secular Sanskrit because that's what it is. It's an intellectual Sanskrit.
right.
And the way that Sanskrit works is it works on the basis of dictionaries. And you can't teach Sanskrit on the basis of dictionaries because Sanskrit is actually poetry. So let me describe a little bit the difference so you can get an idea. There are in Sanskrit 49 letters. Okay, and they're not referred to as letters, they're referred to as aksharas. And aksharas basically in Sanskrit means beyond decay, eternal. So
Mm,
these are 49 eternal principles. Now here's what's going to really blow your mind. They Sanskrit is actually a cosmology. When you go through Sanskrit and you start with the first letter, like the in America, that's the origin of the universe.
oh
And
wow.
then you have the second letter, the second akshara, which is A, it's the long A, the A of Ananda, of perfect ecstasy, perfect love, perfect peace. Okay, Ananda doesn't mean just bliss. If you look it up and see, this is the problem. This is the problem. This is exactly the problem that you have when you use dictionaries. Anandaha is so profound as a word that you can't translate it into English. So what has happened is that, all the teachers that are coming from India, well, how are you going to teach in English unless you use your translation? So they translate Anandaha as the word bliss. Well, it doesn't just mean bliss. And actually the closest experience that I think a lot of people, probably a lot of your listeners have had, is these near-death experiences.
Yeah.
People are having these near-death experiences. They describe the experience they have, and they use different words, and they many of them say it's so beyond words I can't even describe it. But they talk about this. Unconditional love. I mean, you just feel this incredible love. You feel this incredible forgiveness. It's like, this profound love for who you are as a human being. You feel this incredible peace. You feel this ecstasy. You feel this expanded consciousness, this expanded awareness. That's Ananda. How do you put all that into one word? So
Right.
this is why Sanskrit is so incredible, because unless you understand the true Sanskrit, you don't really get the beauty of what the ancient rishis tried to teach, and you can't really understand yoga. You can't even understand Indian scripture.
Mhm.
So this is what I was taught. I was basically taught the true Sanskrit of the ancient rishis,
Mhm.
and it's cosmology. I mean, when you go through the whole sequence of letters, it's actually the unfolding of the universe, and it's the purpose of the universe. So, as I say on my website, this is the theory of everything that Einstein dedicated his whole life to. He in his quest to create a unifying theory of relativity, that's what he was looking for. He was trying to create a cosmology, a theory of everything. And sadly, at the end of his life, he felt that his life was largely a failure, and he would ultimately be forgotten because he wasn't able to achieve what he was looking for. Well, of course. And this reminds me actually of an incredible quote. I wanted to bring this up, earlier. An incredible quote from Max Planck, who is, of course, highly regarded in the scientific community. And Max Planck was not just a great scientist. He was, people don't call him a philosopher, but I don't think you can really contemplate science in any real depth without having a philosophical perspective. So I want to quote Max Planck, and then I want to quote something that Yeshua said, and I want to quote something that Krishna said, because if you ponder these three quotations, you'll realize you'll realize that they're all pointing to the same thing. So let me give you this quotation from Max Planck. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness.
Mhm.
We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness.
Mhm.
Think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredibly profound,
Yeah.
you know? And this guy is considered the father of quantum physics.
Hmm.
This stuff is not taught. I mean, what's taught is, the scientific worldview doesn't bring in this kind of profound philosophy. And yet
No.
it's so central to how Max Planck thought. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. So, what is Max Planck basically saying? And this is the transition we're going to go through, Peter, in this new age. We're beginning to realize that matter is not even real. How do we know that? I mean, who popularized that idea actually was Neo or Morpheus, in the Matrix. You know,
Yes.
you, you know that famous scene where, I love that scene. I mean, I think everybody loved that scene, especially guys, where Morpheus is training Neo, how to do what was it, kung fu and karate. I mean, all the different sciences, right? All the,
Martial arts.
So at any rate, and there's a scene where after that scene, Morpheus or Neo's standing at a chair, and Morpheus says, "So you think that chair is real?" And like Neo can't take it. It's like I've had enough. I've had enough. Get me the hell out of here.
Right. Right. Right.
But Sri Yukteswar in 1894. So I think The Matrix came out in 1999. So like 100 years before, Sri Yukteswar actually describes this phenomena in the Holy Science. And here's how he describes it. He says if you think about this world and how it actually works, you'll notice that everything that you see is actually a light wave coming into your retina, and then that electrical signal is then transmitted via a particular nerve. I'm sure there's a medical term for it, to the brain. And then it's interpreted by the brain. And the same happens with each of the five sentences. What you're hearing is, a different wavelength, and your ears interpret it, and it sends it down a different nerve, to your brain. So what's happening is that your brain is interpreting all of these electrical signals, and it's basically saying, okay, that's a physical reality. That's real out there. Is it really?
Right. Right. Right.
The truth of the matter is that everything that you're experiencing and everything I'm experiencing is simply your own psyche.
Right.
We're just experiencing our own psyche. And so this is a phenomenal shift in perception. What we're experiencing is consciousness. And so there's this whole play of consciousness going on where, I'm experiencing you. I mean, I'm looking at a laptop, you and I haven't met in person, but, my mind's already convinced, hey, there's a real human being over there.
Right. Right. Right.
The truth of the matter is I've only seen the digital you.
Right. Right.
So at any rate, Sri Teshwar talked about this in 1894, that everything is fundamentally electrical. And in this age, we are going to completely master light, because light and electricity are essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
So at any rate, or physical light anyway. So that gets into a philosophical conversation, but we won't go down that tangent. So at any rate, everything is fundamentally consciousness. Matter isn't actually real. It's something that it's an electrical signal that our senses are perceiving and the brain interprets as reality. And we all go to the same schools. We've all been indoctrinated the same, yeah, that's real. And so we all think that this is real and we have to manipulate reality out there. And so, the fundamental idea of yoga philosophy is what creates your reality is your consciousness.
Yeah. It all starts internally, inside.
It all starts internally. So, the whole secret to life is to master yourself, is to master your own consciousness. And that's why this quote of Max Planck is so powerful. And
What are the other two quotes?
so here's a quote from Yeshua. It's a very famous quote. A lot of people have heard it, but I don't think Christians have ever really understood it. And to be honest with you, I don't think it's ever really been taught. So it's basically from Luke 17, 20, 21. And when he was demanded of the Pharisees when the kingdom of God should come, he answered them and said, the kingdom of God cometh not with observation. It doesn't come through the five senses. The kingdom of God is not a place. It's not going to happen on this planet. It's not a function of your five senses. It doesn't occur in time. It doesn't occur in space.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's saying, you know. Neither shall they say, lo here, lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Well, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
It means it's within your own consciousness.
Right.
That's what it fundamentally means. So consciousness is the substratum of our whole existence. And and fortunately most of us have seen and fallen in love with, the Matrix because all ultimately Neos. I mean, that's the fundamental message, of the Matrix. Neo is basically a Christ figure.
Yes.
He's a hero image,
Yes.
and who is the hero? We are all the hero in our own journey. And we all have ultimately miraculous powers. That's why the New Testament captivated people for thousands of years, because Yeshua basically embodied the fact that we are omnipotent beings. And so, and that's what the kingdom of God is. We discover our true nature. So I want to also give you a quote from Krishna because it sheds a little bit of a different light on the same theme, but it's an incredibly beautiful and powerful quote, and it's very well known in India. And this, of course, is an English translation, but it gives you a very deep sense as to what the Vedic tradition is about. For one who has conquered the mind, it becomes his best friend. But for one who has failed, it becomes his worst enemy.
Mm,
So he's talking about consciousness.
yeah.
And that's the fundamental challenge that we all have, okay? Our minds are on automatic. We've all been indoctrinated to think a certain way, and our minds are fundamentally on automatic. And we have no idea how to perceive our true eternal nature. So as a result of that, we don't even know how to master the mind. And actually, in Sanskrit, the word mind is actually a translation of the Sanskrit manas. And manas doesn't mean consciousness. Consciousness is a different word in Sanskrit, okay? When we hear the word mind in English, we tend to think consciousness. But no, when you hear the word mind, you should actually think hammer, okay? Like using a hammer to bang a nail, because
Okay.
the mind is just a tool. The mind is just a tool, and we're all walking around thinking we're a hammer.
Okay.
It's like, and there's that saying, to a carpenter, every problem looks like a nail.
Hmm. I like that. I like that.
Who we are is so much beyond being a damn hammer. Our consciousness is absolutely vast. And this is why I love all these, near-death experiences that people are having. It's like one of my favorites is from this guy, Tony Sikoria. I think I sent it to you. I mean, the guy is just an incredible sweetheart, and he's a back surgeon. I mean, this guy's no lightweight. I mean, he's a very accomplished human being, and he has this near-death experience. And, and like a lot of people, I mean, it shocks the hell out of you. It's like, oh my God, what happened? And he sees his body lying on the ground. And I love how he refers to his body. He says, it's just a costume. It's just a
Gotcha.
costume. It's not the real you,
Right.
And this is the experience that everybody's having with these near-death experiences. It's like we're beginning to realize that, like Neo, it's exactly the same metaphor. We're
Right.
realizing that we are way beyond this body. We are eternal consciousness. So the whole thrust of Sanskrit, and this is why I fell in love with it, is because it is the language of eternity. It's the language of self-transformation. It's the ancient rishis, when they understood that consciousness was the basis of reality, they asked themselves a fundamental question. Well, how do you master the psyche? And guess what? They invented a whole vocabulary for it, and that's Sanskrit. And
Mm.
so if you think about any of the sciences, think about medicine or think about physics or chemistry or engineering. Do you think you could ever master medicine without learning a whole new medical vocabulary? Forget it. Same thing with engineering. Any subject, you're going to end up learning this whole new vocabulary. Well, here's the most amazing thing about Sanskrit. It's the vocabulary of your own true eternal nature and how to reclaim it and how to discover it and how to master it. I mean, it's mind-boggling. So that's why I fell in love with Sanskrit.
I can see why. I can see why. It's amazing. It's
It's
amazing.
amazing. It's
So
amazing.
can you tell a little bit about your book to the viewers? What do you describe in the book? Do you talk about your teachings like with your teacher, or is it more of like basically like nose to the paper, like this is what Sanskrit is, and you break it all down? Like what is in your book?
Okay, very good. Well, believe it or not, it's turned out to be four books, a tetralogy.
Oh, awesome.
And I only had, I mean, I was so exhausted, that I still have one of them that still is yet to be published. But I'm going to describe the four of them because that's how the whole thing evolved. And what happened was when I took it to the printer in India, I mean, it was like, 4 inches thick. I mean, it was friggin' ridiculous.
Wow.
Like, who the hell is going to want to read something like this? I mean, some lawyer's going to put it on his shelf and make it look good in his office, but that's about it. So I realized I had to divide it up into a number of different books, and that's what I ultimately did. And three of them are in print, and I'm hoping at some point I'm going to have the time to actually get the fourth one done. But let me describe the sequence. So the first one is the title is Sanskrit Soul, and then the subtitle of the first one is Yoga Healing Earth. And so let me just describe what that's about. That's a book that you can actually read from cover to cover because the fundamental idea is that we're all concerned about the fate of our planet. And, we're all hearing about the news about AI, taking over everybody's jobs and possibly, getting out of control and, destroying the planet. And, we have the threat of nuclear weapons and, all the other threats that are there. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't buy that story at all. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's all fear propaganda. To me, humanity has this incredibly beautiful, uplifting future. It's just that we're going through a very profound catharsis on the planet at this particular point in time. And we've been through many. We've been through many. It's cyclical. So the fundamental idea of yoga healing Earth is that yoga will heal Earth. And there's a very simple reason for it, because yoga, and I'm referring specifically to the Yoga Sutras, not postures, because most people, when they hear the word yoga, they think of, hatha yoga, the yoga postures. But yoga is actually, incredibly vast as a philosophy. And so the fundamental idea of yoga philosophy is that we're all here to master our own consciousness. So yoga philosophy is all about self-mastery. And the amazing thing about yoga philosophy is that, in fact, Vedic philosophy as a whole, is that a truth doesn't exist unless you can prove it. So it's completely different than the whole Abrahamic tradition. And What I mean by the Abrahamic tradition is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, because they all basically, see Abraham as their common father. And so, there are essentially, there's more than two, but, there's the Dharmic traditions, which are basically what is called Hinduism. And we've really got to get rid of the word Hinduism. I mean, it's such an insult. The reason why Hinduism became the term that we use for people in India is because when Alexander the Great conquered Persia, he came up to the Indus River and he said, "Who lives on the other side? Indus." So that's how they ended up getting the name Hindus and Hinduism. But
Mm,
the name that is actually used in India is incredibly beautiful, incredibly powerful, and it's Sanatana Dharma.
mm,
And in talking to a friend of mine, I said, "So what do you call yourself?" Like I'm born Catholic, so I refer to myself as a Catholic or whatever, or a Christian or whatever. So how do they refer to themselves? As Sanatanis, not as Hindus. And I think, I think we owe it to the Indian people to honor the beauty and power of who they really are.
yeah.
And I mean, it's bringing tears to my eyes as I say this because it's such an incredible word. The word Sanatana means eternal, okay? And the word Dharma basically means law. So the fundamental idea of Indian scripture, of Vedic scripture, is a study of the laws of the universe.
Mm,
And so the basic difference of Indian philosophy compared to modern science has understood since the days of Galileo that the physical universe is governed by laws. I mean, Kepler discovered the laws of planetary motion, and he discovered their orbits and so on and so forth. All of physical science is basically an investigation into the laws of the physical universe. So the idea of dharma, we say dharma because that's once again secular Sanskrit. And so I can speak secular Sanskrit. That's not a problem. I can say dharma just like everybody else. But the true Sanskrit pronunciation is dharma. So at any rate, the meaning of dharma is the eternal laws of the universe. And so the fundamental idea of the rishis is that everything is governed by law. Your psyche, your destiny, the words that come out of your mouth, everything is governed by law. Now, here's the amazing thing. We have learned with, the physical sciences to master the laws of the physical universe. I mean, the example that I use in my book is the Wright brothers. I mean, they had this flash of intuition. It's like, of course, man should be able to fly, and
right.
they experimented and experimented and experimented. And the story of Kitty Hawk is just one of the most extraordinary stories of American history. And they discovered how to master not just aerodynamics, they also mastered propulsion because they had to get this machine in the air. And so, in discovering those laws, they mastered flight. So imagine that. Imagine mastering the laws of your own psyche.
Yeah.
Imagine that. That's why yoga will heal earth, because ultimately that's what we're all up to. That's what we're all doing. We're all here wanting to master our own existence. Well, what is our own existence? Our own existence ultimately comes down to mastering our own consciousness. So that's why I wrote the book Yoga Healing Earth. What I wanted to do was to basically take the thread, from where we are today and talk about the fundamental delusions of Western society and why we're so stuck, why we're going through a catharsis, and where we're, ultimately what the purpose of it all is. And the purpose of it is to basically go through a profound transition and discover, that we are eternal beings. This is what we need to discover, but we need to discover it from a place of experience. We need to know it for as the truth, not as
Right.
some blind belief, which is what the whole Abrahamic tradition has been about for centuries, even millennia. So at any rate,
So
so
what's
that's
the
Yoga
second
Healing Earth.
what's the second book about?
The second book is subtitled The Vedic Vision of the Cosmos, and maybe we can post a picture of it, on your website. It's actually on my website. You can go to it. If you go to sanskritsoul.org and you click on the second tab, What is Sanskrit? You'll see it. It's a large graphic. It took me about 8 months to create.
Wow.
And so it's the cosmology. It's Vedic cosmology. How, to put it in, Western terms, it's how and why God created the universe.
Mhm.
So it basically takes each of the 49 letters and puts them in little boxes so you can see the whole sequence, how the universe was created and why it was created. And so that's why it's its own book, because that is actually the basis of Sanskrit Soul. What happened was when I met Swamiji, I realized that he was actually talking about this cosmology, but I didn't have any references. It's like I couldn't visualize it. So it actually took me 8, 9 months to actually create this graphic. And when I gave it to Swamiji, he said, "Oh my God." He says, "You put all of the Vedas on one page." I couldn't believe it. I didn't know I had been doing that. And he said, if you understand every little letter and every word in those boxes, you will understand all of the Vedas. I mean, I was flabbergasted.
Wow.
And so what happened was, as I was creating that graphic, that happened like in 2018, as I was creating that graphic, I realized that was the foundation of the book. And at that point, I still didn't understand Sanskrit. I was just putting words down on paper. And so basically, the rest of the book essentially became, okay, I have to be able to explain all those words. And so the third book is referred, it's Sanskrit Soul, the language of the gods. And that's how Indians traditionally refer to Sanskrit as the language of the gods. I like to refer to it as the language of the soul. There's a difference in meaning. The language of the gods fundamentally means that it came from enlightened beings thousands of years ago.
Mhm.
It's a divine language. It's an eternal language,
Yeah.
okay? I like to refer to it as the language of the soul because of something truly, truly profound. And let me elucidate this particular principle. There's a word that has come into the English language relatively recently. I haven't researched it, but when I was a kid, we used to use the word epiphany. But the word epiphany meant the baptism of Yeshua on January 6th. It was a holiday. And it's now come into the English language to mean, a major aha, an awakening. So we now have a number of words: realization, awakening, aha, and epiphany. Okay. Now, why is this so important? Because that is the very essence of Sanskrit. What the ancient rishis understood is that experience of epiphany is true knowledge.
Mm.
Okay, and Sanskrit makes a very clear distinction between what it refers to as pata, which is translated as memorization, and aha. And actually, aha is actually a word in Sanskrit. So, at any rate,
What does
what
it
does
mean? What
pata
does it mean in
mean?
Sanskrit? Aha.
Pardon me?
What does aha mean in Sanskrit?
It means realization. It means
Oh,
aha.
okay.
We're
Okay.
actually speaking Sanskrit when we say, "Oh, I
Wow.
had a major aha yesterday."
Oh, I love it. Love it.
I'm even laughing. I mean, as I laugh, it sounds like aha.
Uh-huh.
And
Aha, it
uh,
sounds like
here,
aha.
yeah. Well, here's the amazing thing about aha and about realization and epiphany. Whenever you have a major realization, it's like the light goes off in your head. I mean, we have all kinds of visual imagery, right? As to what that experience is like. You'll notice you feel this incredible joy. I mean, you feel so happy because you actually experience an expansion of the consciousness. Like, oh wow, unbelievable. And the
Right.
first thing you want to do is share it with somebody that you really love, or and so forth, because it's one of the most amazing experiences of your life. I had a student of mine who said something really beautiful because I was talking about this to her, and she said, when I've had that experience, it's like it's so magical, it's so beautiful. I want to hold on to it for days and days and days,
Mhm.
because it's so life transforming. And so that's the word epiphany. And what happened was the ancient rishis understood that was true knowledge. Let me contrast that with pataha. Pataha is a different kind of knowledge. Okay, and pataha is translated as memorization. So most of what we're studying at university is pataha. It's just memorization. It's just training the hammer to be a good hammer.
Yeah.
It's not real knowledge. Real knowledge are the realizations of the soul. So here's the amazing thing about Sanskrit is that when you take two aksharas, two letters, okay, they each have a really profound cosmological meaning. And if we do another video, we can get into how that actually works, okay? Because I'm looking at my clock. I can't believe we're into it an hour and 40 minutes.
Uh-huh.
But so at any rate, when you combine two of these aksharas, it creates this incredible poetry because each cosmological principle is so profound in its own right. So now you're starting to contemplate the poetry of Sanskrit. And that's the whole point of Sanskrit, because as you contemplate the cosmological principle and the poetry that is evoked, what are you doing? You're going within, and you start to have one aha after another. You
Right.
start to have revelation after revelation after revelation. And so what is happening is that the whole study of Sanskrit does exactly what Yeshua was talking about when he says the kingdom of heaven is within. Sanskrit is designed to take you within your own psyche, to contemplate the very mysteries of the universe. Isn't that mind-boggling?
Yes. Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
so beautiful. It's
Yeah.
so beautiful.
That's
That's
amazing.
where the true teaching happens. The true teaching is always happening at the very heart and soul of your own psyche.
Yeah.
That's why Sanskrit is what it is. It's so amazing.
It's incredible. It's incredible. So tell me what's the fourth book going to be about?
So the fourth book is actually, so the third book is the language of the gods, and that's where I go in and I describe each and every akshara, what it means.
Okay.
Okay, because the cosmological principle is profound.
Mhm.
And what I also did, so you have to get where I was thinking from when I wrote this whole thing, as I said, there needs to be a textbook. I mean, if less than 1% of the people on the planet, less than 1% of Sanskrit scholars know this, I need to create a textbook.
For
So
sure.
that's where I was thinking from. And so basically, the third book, The Language of the Gods, is a is the textbook for learning each akshara and understanding what its deep meaning is.
Mhm.
Okay. And so I dedicate 2 pages to each letter or each akshara.
Mhm.
So, 2 times 49, let's say 2 times 50. So that's basically 100 pages.
Mhm.
And then what I also do, I take 2 pages, and one of the things that I did in writing this book is Swamiji turned me on to a particular dictionary, which he said is by far the best dictionary of Sanskrit English. It's by Vaman Shivaramat. And so I studied that book. It's like 1,800 pages. And I swear to God, I must have read every single page, not from cover to cover. I mean, who the hell reads a dictionary from cover to cover, right? But I looked up every single word. And what I did was I wanted to essentially, people that really want to get into understanding the true Sanskrit, I said to myself, okay, what are the most important words in Sanskrit? And so I went through the dictionary and I had a very rigorous metric that I used, which was, okay, well, if a particular word shows up a lot in the dictionary, that's a key word in Sanskrit. So then I put together a list of the most important words associated with each akshara. So, the idea is to basically give people a vocabulary of 1,000 to 2,000 Sanskrit words. And so the whole thrust of my teaching methodology, I learned something because I was actually teaching English as a second language for a couple of years, in this the journey that this body's traveled. And one of the questions I asked myself is, why can children learn their native language so easily, and why is it difficult for them to learn a second language? And the conclusion that I came to is simply because they learn one word at a time. And they fall in love with the first word that they learn. Like I remember my son, the latest one, Diego, that was born. We were living in across the street from Stanley Park in Vancouver. And if you ever been to Stanley Park, there's all these beautiful ducks and swans and geese that are there. And so Diego's first word was duck.
Mm,
of course. I mean, he was having that experience every day. But, as parents, what happens, your child, says their first word and we're so thrilled. And, what are we doing? We're giving them this incredible feedback as to, how wonderful it is that they can express a word. Well, now they start to discover the beauty of speaking, the beauty of language. So that's the approach that I've taken with Sanskrit. I just teach Sanskrit one word at a time. And when you discover the beauty and the power, like you already discovered the word aha. When you discover the beauty and power of each word, it's like, well, God, I got to learn the next word, and I got to learn the next word. So that's the whole approach.
I love it.
That's what that book's about.
I love it. So what's the fourth one going to be about?
So the fourth one is essentially a glossary. It's like it's essentially a dictionary.
Okay.
So what I did was, so in all three of the books, there's a lot of prose written in English, but they're interspersed with Sanskrit words.
Mhm.
So, because the whole thrust of the book is to teach you Sanskrit, it's like if I am talking about karma, I don't write the word karma in English. I actually give you the word karma in its Devanagari font and also in what is called IAS, the International Association of Sanskrit Transliteration. It's the way that you convert the Devanagari script, which is the traditional Indian script, to Latin script. So that way somebody can read the book and okay, they can see the Latin pronunciation and they can say it. You're going to see Karman. Oh, okay, Carmen,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth. So I wrote the book that way so that people could, start to discover these words. But it's like the word, Karaman is incredibly profound. I mean, it wasn't appropriate to interrupt, the writing of the book, and explain each word. So that's what the glossary is for. You can basically open the glossary and read about Karman, and you can read about all the other words, and that way you discover, the deep meaning of each word,
I love
So.
it. And
So that's
so,
fundamentally why it's organized the way it is. And, just to let you know, I mean, the book, I actually, was very fortunate to meet this young guy in Delhi. His name was Varun. He has since then inherited his father's printing business. And he took me under his wing. I mean, here I am, what am I at like 70 years old, and this kid's 19 years old, right? He's taking this he's taking this 70-year-old man under his wing, right? But he teaches me the printing business. And one of the things that he taught me was that we could actually insert colored pictures into the book. So the book is actually an exquisitely beautiful publication. Here, I can pull one of them open, I put pictures like this, interspersed in the book and so forth. So there's a lot of color graphics throughout the book, I wanted to really make it a beautiful looking book in addition to talking about Sanskrit. And just so that people know, is that the pictures that are included in the book are from all the religions of the world.
wow.
I mean, religion has really gotten a bad rap in the last 400 years. And it's like, I get it, because it's all been, based on blind belief and people arguing with each other. I have the right religion and you don't, and all that kind of stuff, and it's created endless controversy. It's gotten a really bad rap. But the truth of the matter is that if the Catholic Church didn't exist, there would have never been a Western civilization. That's a fact. And so at any rate, what I wanted to do in the book was I wanted to honor the beauty and depth of every religion and say, look, we're one human family. And the scriptures of the whole world are our common heritage. They don't belong to any one religion, they belong to the human race. And so in the book, I'm quoting from all the great human beings of history, whether they're religious or scientific, like I quoted that thing of, what's his name? So Max Planck. So, there's incredible wisdom. Our ancestors have had incredible wisdom. And so there's a lot of quotations in that book from the New Testament, from different scriptures, but also from great scientists and, artists and musicians and so on and so forth, because, wisdom is not the purvey of just religious people. I mean, I've got a quote in there from Lionel Messi. ostensibly the greatest footballer on the planet.
Mhm.
And, I mean, incredible quote. I mean, and so all of us have access to profound wisdom. And when we access the true wisdom of who we are, we start expressing who we really are. And that's really what we're here to do on the planet. So, at any rate, that's what Sanskrit Soul is fundamentally about. And the last thing that I want to say is that I realized that anybody who sits down and wants to read a 2,000-page book from cover to cover has to go see a psychiatrist. Who the hell does that today, right? And it's like nobody has time. Everybody's super busy. So, what I've been working on recently is creating some online courses to do exactly what I was talking about. Teach Sanskrit one
Yes.
word at a time so that people can absolutely fall in love with Sanskrit. I want to, this once again, it brings tears to my eyes. I mean, Sanskrit is so beautiful. It's just so mind-boggling. And when you fall in love with it, it's like falling in love with who you really are. It's like falling in love with the eternal you. It's so incredible.
Wow.
And so that's what these courses are
So,
designed to do.
so where can people sign up for courses with you?
Well, basically, it's on my website. I have to apologize. It's like it's it's 99% done, and I've been saying 99% for like about 6 months.
Well, maybe by the time we release this, it'll be at 100%.
Yeah, I now doing this podcast, I have to. There's only a couple of things that need to be finished, but I ran up against some major blocks. I was using ChatGPT to create certain apps inside of the website, and I don't know if anybody has learned this. I'm just learning this from experience, but unfortunately, AI doesn't do a very good job of coding. Have you been hearing that?
A little bit, yeah.
There's guys now that are publishing some pretty extreme videos talking about the reality about AI. It doesn't do a very good job of coding.
Mhm.
And in fact, there are Harvard studies now that have come out that are basically saying that, that they created two different groups. I mean, this is off topic, but it relates to the fact of, why I've been struggling in terms with my own website
Yeah.
is that they had one group that they monitored, and they had a second group. The first group, they used AI to code. And the second group, they coded just traditionally the way they did. And the people that were coding with AI thought, oh, this is fantastic. AI is writing all the bloody code. And, they're saving a lot of time. And they thought that they were saving a lot of time. And, the other group was basically doing it the traditional way. The group that has been coding the traditional way ends up producing a result 40 times faster than people that are using AI.
Whoa.
And and the reason is because AI creates all of these bugs, all of these mistakes.
Mm.
So it looks good when you look at the code, but it doesn't work. So then you have to figure out what the bug is. And that's what happened to me. I started realizing, oh my God. And so at any rate, we're going to be going through a profound realization with respect to AI. I mean, a lot of what's being told, the human race about AI is actually not, in fact, accurate.
Mhm. Mhm. Well,
So whatever.
we'll definitely share any of your links to your website so people can purchase your book. Is the book available to be purchased anywhere in the world?
Yeah, I have a very limited print. I have 400 that are sitting in a warehouse with a friend in Las Vegas. So I kind of thought that the US would be the initial market for this particular book. So he's ready to ship. I've already investigated printing more. But here's the thing. One of the things that I decided to do is I decided to bundle the book with the first course
Oh, cool.
because I don't want this to just become some kind of dust collector. It's like it's intimidating. I mean, it's a big, it's a friggin' huge book.
Mhm.
And so, I realize that, if you really want to take this on, if you really want to understand Sanskrit, then, you need to do at least the first course. And my hope is, it's basically 4 lessons, an hour each. And so, my hope is that with the first course, so each lesson is 8 words. And so 4 times 8, 32. So, with the first course, you're going to learn 32 of the most important words in Sanskrit.
Love it.
And my hope is that with the first course, you're going to be madly in love. and you're going to be hooked, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. Well,
So
thank you.
that's the idea.
Yeah, thank you so much for creating these books and being so passionate about it. I've learned so much from you today, and I'm sure the listeners have as well. And yeah, I'm really really excited to. You got me excited about Sanskrit more than I already was. I mean, I have a tattoo on my wrist, you know.
Oh, you do.
Yeah, that says Sat Nam. So
Well,
yeah,
thank you for proposing this, Peter. I mean, this is a real, meeting you, online. I mean, hopefully we'll meet in person at some point, but soon. But this is a real gift from heaven. I mean, really, you telling me let's do this podcast. I mean, it's just real heartfelt thanks for, you reaching out to me and proposing this. So, hopefully we can do it again.
yeah, yeah. You're welcome back on the podcast anytime, and I'd love to see that fourth book get published too. Maybe this can be the
Well,
first
I
step.
would too. I'm a little bit embarrassed because I actually wrote to be published in 2024. And then, in my mind, it was 2025. But I ended up, I realized that once I had the three books, I had to put all my focus on marketing and developing a website and all that kind of stuff. So, I kind of got derailed for the last couple of years. But, everything will come full circle.
For sure.
So, at any rate, that's where things are at.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining today. It
And
was.
it's been a real pleasure. I can't believe we spent 2 hours. Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted
Yeah,
you.
yeah. It's been a real pleasure for me as well, and thank you so much for joining today. It's been a true honor to have you on.
Okay. Well, namaste. We'll be in touch real soon. Okay.
Okay, namaste. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Until next time.
Take care. Bye.